Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 17th May 2024, where we will be discussing the most important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. So we'll be discussing 9 articles in total. The very first article is about the closeness between Russia and China in recent days. In the second one, we'll be looking into the recent Supreme Court case on the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. In the third one, we'll be looking into de-recognizing and de-registering political parties in the country. In the fourth one, we'll be looking into the pioneering use of artificial intelligence in the drug development of the world. And finally, we'll be concluding with the latest interpretation of the Supreme Court on the right to property. And finally, we'll be looking into 4 important prelim snippets in where we'll be trying to understand prelims news in short for effective revision for prelims examination, which is due soon. So stay tuned. Students, welcome to the very first article. Here we'll be understanding the implications of relationship between China and Russia and the recent developments on the same and the impact of the same on India's interests. The presidents of 2 countries here have recently met in China and they have signed some historic deals and also said some historic statements. And we'll be looking into the improvement in China and Russia's relations recently in the light of this particular examination. Now here we have to understand this, that the China and Russia relationships are actually developing gradually, and this is a very important part of your syllabus because we have to consider the impact and the various policies of other nations on India's interest. Now also for UPSC prelims, we have the current events of national and international importance. For that same reason, this is also a very important aspect. Now to start with, we will be starting with the historical background of relationships between China and Russia. Now we have to understand that initially when the international efforts and the diplomatic relations were established after the World War II, we have to understand China and Russia were not on a great footing. That means initially their relations were not good, because it was said that in 1950s when Mao Zedong he visited Russia, he had to wait for days to actually get a visit from Joseph Stalin, who was the president of Russia back then. And that is what we have to understand. The relationships between the 2 nations initially were vastly not very well established due to the ideological differences and also due to the personality effects of these 2 kind of presidents back then. And we have to understand also a major border conflict took place in 1969 between Russia and China, and also we can understand during the same time, during the same decade of 1960s, in 1962 we had the Indo-China War II. So China started becoming aggressive from the decades of 1960s onwards itself, and one of the very first casualties of this conflict was initially India and Russia, and that is what we have to understand. This was the beginning of the relationship, but we have to understand after the date of Mao Zedong, right? In 1976, we understand that the China and Russia became more and more closer, and we have to also understand after and also during the Cold War and after the Cold War, we have to understand the implications of the breakdown of the Soviet Union and also the weakening of USSR, because after 1991 the USSR, we know, actually was balkanized. It actually splintered into many other nations, and this actually left Russia economically very weak. So we have to understand that Russia was actually ideologically was also totally apart from the Western nations such as the US and its allies. So that is why Russia had to depend on other nations apart from that. And also when we talk about the West after the conclusion of the Cold War, we have to understand that USA became more and more economically developed and also more and more politically connected across the world. And also the international relations aspect of the USA, it improved vastly after the Cold War, and it also resulted the same decline with respect to Russia. So we have to understand these patterns, that after the Cold War, this particular development left Russia at a disadvantage, and that is why Russia started looking into China and many other nations when it tried to get integrated into the global economic systems. And this is when it it became more and more close to China. And also from the decades of 1990s to 2000 onwards, the economic interdependence that Russia and China developed between themselves was huge. It was understood back then that Russia became a supplier of the raw materials, because you have to understand that Russia is having a lot of raw materials when it comes to natural gas, natural resources, and also various other energy supplies. So it started supplying the same to China, and finally for the final Chinese good, Russia became a very common, very also a big market for Chinese exports to Russia. So here the economic interdependence started developing, and also we understood that in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, which was actually a portion of Ukraine back then. So when Russia invaded Crimea, and it is still invading, the Crimea portion, the Crimea province is still under Russia invasion right now. So we have to understand that back then China also supported Russian actions, and also apart from the Western sanctions, because after the annexation of the Crimea, US and the other Western allies started sanctioning Russia, or say imposing economic and say military restrictions on Russia. But after that, China never sanctioned Russia in this matter, because China wanted to keep Russia close in its own partnerships. So that is why also against the Western sanctions, China kept its economic and military and all the engagements on with Russia. And also in the recent Russia-Ukraine crisis that we see, right, that has been waging on since 2021, we find that China also is on the same pages with that of Russia, because apart from the Western nations such as US and the other European nations which are severely condemning Russia in this Russia-Ukraine war, China and also like-minded nations such as India has never condemned Russia regarding this, because we have to understand China recognizes Russia as a close partner, and that is why China has always kept Russia more closer. In the recent meeting, that is the recent meeting that took place between Russia and Chinese presidents in 2024, Putin personally told that China is actually my dear friend, and this is a very significant event, because the more Russia is actually becoming close to China, it is actually the Western camp and the Western countries who will be at risk, and who will be also very apprehensive of the recent developments and the recent closeness in ties between these two nations. And also we have to play very close kind of attention to the diplomatic language that they use. For example, Russia and China has this no limit strategic partnership, specifically before just a few days before the Russia-Ukraine crisis took place back in 2021. So since then, Russia and China has this no limit strategic partnership. That means there are actually no limits, because both of say Russia and China, they belong to the same ideological camp, because they are actually ideologically against the US and also against the Western countries. And also they have to also understand that going forward in the next 10 to 20 years, Russia and China will have to dominate the same phase on the global arena, because it has been the US after the collapse of the 1990s Cold War that US has been militarily, economically, politically, and also at various international organizations, it has been seen that US has been the leading force. Now Russia and China and also the various other developing nations, they want to combat the same, they want to totally change the global order, and that is why we have to understand, we have to look at this development very closely. And also Russia and China, in their common statement in the last few days, they have stressed their partnerships as something which is not opportunistic or something that is everlasting, signifying the strengthening ties between the two nations. And here we have to look at some of the strengths of this partnership between China and Russia. We have to understand that China and Russia share their borders, and also they are located in the Central Asian region. And on this side we have the Pacific Ocean, which is eventually connecting also through the same to the Indian Ocean. And on the other side we have European nations, right? And also we have the various Central Asian countries in the same region. So we can understand, for Russia and China, the more close their partnerships will be, the more better regional stability they will be able to bring in the particular region. And here we have to understand that the closeness in ties between the two nations is actually a step forward in their current political discourse. And here when we look at the various Central Asian nations such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and also the Azerbaijan, and also the Armenia, and all of the Eastern European nations also, we have to understand that China and Russia is actually aiming to spread their influence across these nations. And also, these nations are actually more closer to Russia and China than to India or than to the West. So that is why these countries will also be dependent on these two nations. So that is why, apart from this, China is also becoming very, very aggressive in the South China Sea. Apart from this, it is also getting into various conflicts with many of the nations such as India with respect to border disputes and so on. So we have to understand that Russia and China, if this share some common characteristics, some close ties, they can actually yield a big regional power together. And also, as we have discussed in the beginning also, that Russia and in the Russia and Ukraine war, it has been actually the no limit strategic partnership that helped between the two nations to actually go forward with the partnership. And also China supported actively when it actually came to not condemning Russia on the global center stage. It also is helping Russia with various arms and protecting against the sanctions imposed by the West. When it comes to trade, Russia is actually a very, very big market for Chinese exports. Apart from this, the Russian energy supplies are actually a very, very crucial raw material supply source for China too. Then when we talk about the technological and infrastructural portion, Vladimir Putin has actively put a lot of stress on Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, because we have to understand that Belt and Road Initiative is actually an initiative by China to actually reinvigorate that old Silk Route that China had during the ancient times, and it is trying to again establish the same through both land, that is actually connecting China to the European nations via land routes, and also via a maritime Silk Route, which will be actually a very, very grand idea of China to actually connect the Pacific Ocean to the Indian Ocean and hence forward. So here, to realize Belt and Road Initiative of China, it has to also bring in the partnership of Russia too, and that is why these two countries are also very much focusing on the infrastructural projects. Apart from this, the technological aspects of spreading 5G, artificial intelligence, and the latest state-of-age technologies, they are also being promoted by technological transfer between Russia and China. So both of the countries, they can benefit from the technological progress. Then when it comes to security cooperation, we can see that the security aspirations of these two nations lie because of their regional dimensions, right? And here we can also understand that when we look at this particular region, the regional security aspect is also highlighted because of their membership in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, in which actually China and Russia were the founding members. So Shanghai Cooperation Organization actually looks into the various aspects of terrorism, cyber security, and also to the aspects of funding of the same. India also became a part of the SCO later, along with Pakistan. And here, when we talk about a particular nation, North Korea, we understand that North Korea is actually blacklisted by most of the nations, particularly the Western nations. But it is actually Russia and it is actually China who is actually very, very close to North Korea. When it comes to supporting them, with military aid and money and so on, China and Russia has been always at the forefront to help North Korea in this matter. Next, China also has this overarching aim of, say, capturing power in the Indian Ocean region, and that is where China is also seeking the support of Russia in the same. Now here, we have to look into the critical concerns for India. Now India has to obviously be very concerned, and this can be illustrated by a simple example. Now take the example of Vikas. Vikas is a very close friend of Rahul, but maybe sometime in the near future, there can be a third friend, Surya Prakash, right? So Surya Prakash will be meddling in between the two friends, and they will be very, very tensed out of the outcomes. Maybe Vikas and Rahul would want to go to India Gate, but maybe Surya Prakash may be dragging them to Red Fort. So that will be the main issue when there will be another best friend of Rahul, right? So that is the main aspect here. So here, Vikas is actually India, Rahul is actually Russia, and Surya Prakash is actually China. So we have to understand, for India, it is a very, very serious cause of concern, because Russia has been historically a very all-weather close ally of India. So since the beginning, or say even before the independence, and particularly after the independence of India, it has been seen that Russia has been a very close military and economic partner of India, and that is why India cannot lose the strategic ambitions and the strategic cooperation that India has with Russia. In the past, we have seen before the Cold War and also after the Cold War, it has been Russia who has been helping India in various conflicts, both internal and external conflicts. Also, in the present times, we have seen that with reference to any conflicts, say global conflicts such as even the Russia-Ukraine crisis, right? India has also played the same role such as China. India did not condemn Russia at any United Nations conference or any kind of, say, international summits. It has also protected Russia against the sanctions because India imported a large amount of Russian crude oil, and actually this helped the Russian economy too. So India over the past and the present times, it has been very close to Russia too. So that is why India has to be very concerned with the growing relationship between the two nations. And here you have to understand that India cannot let Russia become a junior partner to China, because we now understand China is actually one of the 5 major global economies, and here within the same, India is also within the 5 major global economies. But we have to understand the economic strength of Russia in recent times. They have fallen down, and that is why Russia is actually trying to diversify their partners, particularly when there are Western sanctions against them. So that is why China, it can be one time in the future that China can actually entangle Russia and actually make Russia a junior partner and make it a partner for its crimes too. And also India is also heavily reliant on the various amount of Russian defense supplies. Even the our BrahMos missile is actually developed in cooperation and collaboration with the Russian authorities, defense authorities. And that is what we have to understand, that since India is also dependent on the defense supplies from Russia, so India has to definitely be worried regarding the same. Next, we have to understand the economic implications, because there are many Indian investors who have actually set up shop and set up investments opportunities, particularly in the far east of Russia. So that is what is also a cause of concern, because if China is becoming more close to Russia, then maybe these investments will be at stake, because China can actually make Russia a junior partner and make these investments nullify. Next, also we have to understand the energy security aspects, because right now, particularly the Russia-Ukraine war, India has also actually increased its defense and also the energy security and the crude oil and various amount of imports from Russia. So this is also one of the impacts. Then finally, we have to understand the impact on the regional security, particularly when we talk about India's Indo-Pacific strategy, right? So here, the main target that India is actually aiming for is actually countering China. And within the same, if Russia is not an effective partner, maybe India will be losing the sphere of influence that it has on this particular region. And finally, we have to understand that India can also face domestic and diplomatic dilemmas also, because the West is actually fully against Russia with various sanctions and also at various fora. The Western countries have actually criticized India for being with Russia. And now if Russia is becoming more close with China, then Indian diplomacy will be at a dilemma as to what to do in the particular future. So that is why India right now must be carefully balancing the situation. It must be carefully watching what is coming out of these talks and summits, and finally taking a particular stand on the same. In the next one, we'll be looking at the recent Supreme Court case and hearing or the final judgment on the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, particularly with reference to the Section 45, which pertains to the stringent provisions of bail in this particular act. Now, this is a very important aspect for UPSC prelims for polity and governance topics, and also for GS2, where we have statutory, regulatory and various quasi-judicial bodies. Now, in this one, we have to first understand the first provision of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Now, when we talk about Prevention of Money Laundering Act, the very act has the term money laundering within the same. The money laundering, when we try to understand the concept, it is actually very intricately linked to the circulation of black money and how black money eventually turns out to be white money or legitimate money. Now, we know black money is actually generated via illegal means. So we can understand the person who is generating black money, maybe through betting, gambling and various even illegal activities. So that person cannot spend or show their black money in their bank accounts, in their land, in their various other legitimate sources. So that is why they have to convert this black money into white or legitimate money. So money laundering is that process in which black money is actually converted into legitimate money. This is actually practiced by actually collection of dirty money, and then you have to put the dirty money into various channels of the financial system. This is actually through the underworld. You have to actually use various complicated financial tricks and also various amounts of layering, where you have to transfer the funds to various offshore or international accounts, to hawala networks, to various other hundi channels, and they will be actually buying the various amount of, say, luxurious assets for investments, for, say, converting this black money finally into white money. So this is actually a complex amount of financial transactions that translate your black to white money. And here the main objective of this act initially was actually to combat drug trafficking and actually to manage the black money coming out of the drug trafficking. Over the years, the PMLA Act have actually overgone many kind of amendments, and recently the latest objectives of this particular act is actually to prevent money laundering in the very first place. It is actually to prevent money laundering or say prevent the flow of money into illegal activities. For this, there are various monitoring stations all across the nations, where particularly the Enforcement Directorate is actually tasked with the management of looking into the various financial operations and financial offences related to money laundering in the nation. Next, it also has the provision of confiscation of any kind of property, or say taking back of the property by the government that has been actually financed from the money laundering proceeds or this kind of proceeds. Next, it is also having the various penalties of the offenders, particularly there will be a fine. It can be also in addition to a minimum of 3 years of imprisonment that can be later extended to 7 years. And also the act has the provision of appointing an adjudicating authority and also appellate tribunals. For this, the act is actually having the provision to empower to appoint various special courts. So here we'll be looking at the various aspects of special courts in the next slide, but here we have to understand that ED or the Enforcement Directorate is the main primary agency regarding the same. Here, ED is actually under the Department of Revenue, Ministry of Finance, and it will be investigating the various financial offences regarding the money laundering activities. Then there will be this Financial Intelligence Unit India, which is actually also under the Department of Revenue, under the Ministry of Finance. Here the main department's function is actually to gather information with reference to various suspect financial transaction. This is actually, they will be looking into the various financial transaction that actually take place eventually to money laundering. And finally, there will be other various offences included under this act itself, which will be not looked into directly by the ED or the FIU, but they will be looked into directly by the local police, CBI, customs departments, and say the SEBI or any other investigative agencies. So this will be for the rest of the offences under the act here. Now here, we have to turn our attention to a very, very important section, that is section 45 with reference to this act here. Now section 45 is actually containing the provisions for bail under this particular act. Now we understand that whenever an accused person will be convicted of a crime, that particular person in a court of law can apply for bail for the release of that accused individual, right? So that is actually a bail provision, and here in this particular act we have two hurdles for any individuals who are applying for bail. The first hurdle is that there will be a public prosecutor who will be appointed from the government side to actually object the bail petition, right? So this PP or public prosecutor will be totally against the person accused in this provision. So this is the very first line of, say, defense from the government side with reference to giving the bail to the individual. Next, there are actually twin conditions for bails. Now even if, say, the accused lawyer is managing to defeat, say, the public prosecutor's arguments in the court of law, then the lawyer or say the accused again have to go to two conditions for bail, and these conditions are actually say contingent to the satisfaction of the judge concerned. Now the satisfaction is also contingent on two grounds. Firstly, the bail grounds, the provision for the bail grounds must be for on reasonable grounds for innocence, and there have to be proven some prima facie innocence. Some prima facie means on the face of it, that means the burden of proof of innocence, right, is actually on the accused individual to get the bail. So we have to understand that it is a very, very stringent condition where the individual, they have to actually prove that they are innocent, while the state, they do not have any provision to give any defense for the particular person here. So that particular person has to arrange a particular lawyer, a particular argument to plead for the innocence there. So here the judge also has to be satisfied, apart from the innocence, right, also has to be satisfied about the zero kind of risk that this person will be posing in the near future from any money laundering cases or any other financial cases. So the judge has to be satisfied that first, the person is innocent, second, the person will not be committing further crimes in the near future. Now here the main primary aim for this strict provision is actually have this kind of strictness over this accused individuals of money laundering. Next, obviously we have to understand that money laundering is a very, very serious crime. That is why the bail provisions of the same has also been kept very, very severe. Next, we have to understand that money laundering crimes have a very, very significant bearing on the financial stability of the country. So that is why any kind of money laundering activity has to be deterred with such kind of strictness. Next, we have to look at two Supreme Court cases. Firstly, the Nikesh Tarachand case of 2018. Here, in this particular case, the Supreme Court actually told that these bail provisions were actually very, very stringent, and the government must be doing something about the same, because it was kind of unconstitutional that the bail provisions were this kind of strict. It was actually dependent on the satisfaction of a judge. Primarily, also after the same, it has to be based on the innocence, and also there has to be a particular guarantee against future offences. So these bail provisions are actually very, very strict, and maybe there can be some instances where maybe the ED, it has been accused of actually putting many innocents in the same under innocence actually under the charge of the PMLA Act. So it was the case here. But again, the center actually put in some more amendments in the PMLA Act, and later in the Vijay Madan Lal case of 2022, the Supreme Court actually green signaled the amendments, and actually right now that is why the bail provisions are still there in the same. And here we have to look into the recent highlights of the judgment. Now, this highlight is actually a very, very important for this particular case, because in this particular judgment, the right to personal liberty has been emphasized a little more, because here, according to the judgment of the Supreme Court, the person summoned by a designated special court under PMLA is actually not in custody of the police. That is why the police, or say the ED, they cannot interrogate this person. And also, the persons who are actually summoned by a particular designated special court, they also need not apply for any bail. Now, when we are talking about this special court, is actually a court of session who actually tries the various PMLA offences. It has been established by according to the notification of the central government, and also this is in consultation with the Chief Justice of the High Court. And the jurisdiction is actually with reference to PMLA offences, scheduled offences related crimes according to this particular act, right? And here, in the section 43 of the PMLA, we have to understand it is empowering the central government to designate the special courts. And here, all the powers of a court of sessions under the CRPC will be under this particular court here. And we have to understand that with reference to the powers of arrest of ED, now this particular highlight of this judgment is actually limiting the powers of the ED. Now, special court actually has to take the cognizance of a case firstly. Now then, ED has to separately apply for the custody once the accused person appears in the court, right? Because we have to understand, it has been seen that in many cases, according to various experts, that ED actually takes custody before even the person is appearing in the court, and also without even applying for any fresh applications in the court. Now they have to actually apply for that application. Next, ED also have to show specific grounds that actually necessitate the custodial interrogation of the person. So this is actually coming from the Supreme Court judgment. Next, the accused individual can also be directed to furnish bonds which are actually sanctioned under the court authority, court officer, under the section 88 of the CRPC. And here, this court bond is actually, we have to understand, the order accepting bond is actually not a granting of the bail, because we have to understand these bonds are actually not amountable to the final bail application. So those two will be separate according to this recent judgment. And finally, this judgment is actually providing more relief to the accused. Now, accused who has appeared in the special court pursuant to his summons are exempted from personal appearance in the future, because it has also been seen in many cases that these accused persons have to come to the court again and again, and that is why they have been exempted from future appearance in the court, right? And also, on the other hand, the special court can actually firstly give a bailable warrant, and after that, if conditions are not favorable, that that court can also give a non-bailable case against the same. Now here, finally, we have to understand ED can still arrest new suspects according to the judgment, because there can be some other accused in the case who have not been caught yet. So apart from those kind of individuals, they can still arrest the new suspects arising of the case, right? And finally, the cooperative accused persons who are actually cooperating with the ED in their investigation, they can also be filing for some relief in the same. So these were all the key highlights of this judgment. So it is very, very important for you all to actually keep cognizant of this highlight of this particularly very important case and the judgments on the bail provisions. In the next article, we'll be looking into the various aspects of de-recognizing and deregistering political parties in India. And here, there has been recently a growing demand for the Election Commission to have the power to de-recognize a political party as of now. And this is a very, very important article written by R. Rangarajan, who is actually an IAS officer. And here the importance for prelims is with reference to sections in the Indian polity and governance part, and with reference to GS2, we have to also look into the salient features of the Representation of the People's Act, because actually the registration of the political parties are governed by the section 29A of the RP Act of 1951. And here, the registration of the same has to be mandatorily done only with the Election Commission of India. And here, when we talk about registration, firstly, when we talk about registration, the political parties have to submit a memorandum or a constitution or a kind of a document for a political party, which is actually reflecting the true faith and allegiance of the political party to the Constitution of India. Then the principles of socialism, secularism and democracy must be there in their objectives or constitution of the political party. And also, they have to uphold the sovereignty, unity and the integrity of India in their preamble and the constitution too. And for the same purpose, the Election Commission of India has this political parties registration tracking management system. Here, the system here is totally online, and through this, the various political parties, they can have real-time registration and tracking of the registration applications of political parties in the country. Also, with reference to verification and login details, everything is actually very, very transparent on the website, on the portal of the Election Commission of India. And here, if you want to actually register a political party, you can easily do the same, manage the status, look at the status and look at the various analytics of your registration on the portal. So that is why we have to understand the main task of registration of political parties lies with the Election Commission of India. The legal benefits if a political party is actually registered with ECI is, firstly, they can get tax exemption for donations under sections 13A of the Income Tax Act 1961. It can also get a common symbol for the Lok Sabha election and also for a state legislative assembly elections. Then also, apart from this, they will be getting the provision of 20-star campaigners or the campaigners who are very, very influential, but of a particular political party. Next, we have to look into what are the recognized political parties. They are very different from the norms that we have seen just in the registered political parties. Note that a particular political party can be both registered and both recognized. Now, when we talk about recognized parties, they are actually recognized as national parties and the state parties. See, the national party, we have to understand, we have a particular criteria for the same. For a party, for any party to be national party or state party, that has to be actually under the election symbols reservation and allotment order of 1968 symbols order. And here, the aspects of national parties, the recognition of the same must be, say, they have to get a minimum of 6% of the total votes polled in the Lok Sabha elections in say 4 or more states, and also 4 Lok Sabha seats. or they can even get 2% of all Lok Sabha seats in the last election with MPs elected from at least 3 states. And also, apart from this, they can also go to another route, that is, they can secure at least 6% of the total valid votes in at least 4 states in the latest Lok Sabha state assembly, or also the party has at least 4 MPs in the last Lok Sabha polls. So if they actually fulfill this criteria, they can actually get national party recognition, and actually the Aam Aadmi Party is the latest national party in the same. Now the conditions for recognition as a state party is actually they have to get a minimum of 6% of valid votes polled in the state assembly election, and also 2 seats in the same state assembly election. Apart from this, 6% of the total valid votes must be at the general election to the Lok Sabha, and also 1 Lok Sabha seat from each state, And finally, they can go through another route, that is actually winning at least minimum of 3% of seats in the state assembly election, or 3 seats in the assembly, whichever is actually more. Now, these criteria are very, very important, extremely important for your prelims and mains examination, because there can be questions based on this particular data and particular this kind of recognitions. The main benefits that actually accrue to a national party is actually winning recognition as a national party, and list actually a party to get an election symbol that is actually valid for across India. Then in addition, they can also get 2 sets of electoral rolls free of cost, and also broadcast telecast time over state run radio and television during general elections too. So they can have more flexibility in the same. And apart from that, recognized parties can further have 40 star campaigners within the same. And here we have to understand that a party can be both registered and recognized, but there are some issues in recent time. We have to understand that the Representation of the People Act actually allows ECI to register political parties, but in except some exceptional circumstances, they cannot, or Election Commission of India, they cannot deregister a political party, right? This was actually stated in this Indian National Congress versus Institute of Social Welfare case. In the Supreme Court, it was highlighted that in the Supreme Court that according to this RP Act, the ECI does not have the power to deregister a political party. But we have to understand, it can only deregister a political party under some exceptional circumstances. These are actually 3. First, the registration of the political party may be, say, obtained by fraud, or say the political parties are conducting activities which are unconstitutional in nature, or say they maybe even have been declared unlawful by the government. So in these 3 cases, the Election Commission of India, they can deregister political parties. But there are some issues we have to understand. Firstly, that only around 1/3 of the political parties, registered political parties, we have to understand, they contest elections, and the rest 66%, right, they do not contest elections. Because maybe these political parties have been set up to, say, avail tax exemption of some individuals, or say some other political parties, right? They are fake political parties. In real life, they do not even contest the elections. And also, some parties are also involved in money laundering activities. So it has been also seen in this particular case. That is why these particular issues are coming up. Then also, we have seen recently in the recent election campaigns also, there have been many leaders across the various political parties who have violated the model code of conduct of the Election Commission, be it based on the various caste issues, the communal issues, and with reference to bribing the voters, or say intimidation of voters by money and muscle power. So we have to understand, this is actually a violation of the spirit of the free and fair elections. So that is why those political parties and also the leaders from the political parties, they must be actually deregistered. And finally, the issues, the rising issues of, say, the freebies or provision of free items by the political parties to the people, right? And say hate speech by the political leaders, rising amount of criminals in particular political parties. So these are also some of the instances where maybe the Election Commission of India, they need some teeth to actually deregister the political parties. Also, the things that we can see here, according to the various reports in recent time, we can see Union Territory of Delhi, right? Then Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and so on, right? They do not even file their records with the Election Commission of India. So that is what we have to understand, and that is here we need to take some steps and actions. Firstly, according to the Election Commission of India, Memorandum for Electoral Reforms, which was actually their various amount of committee recommendations on the reforms, it is very, very highly encouraged for all of you to Google this and look into the various reforms which has been proposed in India for elections. So this report and also the Law Commission in its 255th report, it also proposed that Election Commission of India must be having the power to deregister a political party. And the Law Commission report finally also tells that if a particular political party is failing to contest elections for the consecutive 10 years, they must be immediately deregistered. But so far these recommendations have not been taken into due consideration. Also, paragraph 16A of the Symbols Order, it actually empowers the Election Commission of India to suspend or withdraw recognition to a recognized political party based on two reasons. Firstly, violation of model code of conduct, or also disobeying the commission's legal directives. So in these two respects, we also see the same here. But we have to understand that the government of the day must be taking reforms to actually empower Election Commission of India to deregister a political party. In the next one, we'll be looking into the use of artificial intelligence in drug development, because recently the advent of the AI systems has actually accelerated the use of AI in the drug systems. And here this is a very, very important aspect for UPSC Prelims, General Science, and also for GST, where we have to look into the various aspects of the biotechnology, because use of artificial intelligence in say the development of drugs is actually a component of biotechnology. Now when we talk about any disease, right, our own natural immunity in this kind of say phase, actually we in our body have various natural chemicals to fight against the natural disease. Maybe this disease is taking place in this particular region. So maybe sometimes our immune cells try to cure the disease with their own immune responses. But it can be seen sometimes that our body is not enough. That is why we need some medicines, right? So then the artificial chemicals, so stimulatory drugs or stimulatory medicines, they enter our bloodstream, they go to the affected regions and they enhance the cellular activity in the regions to actually cure us of the disease, right? Or maybe there are other kind of medicines also who actually take the shapes of the various cellular structure of our say body, and also we have to understand that these shapes are a very, very important aspects of the working of a medicine, because whenever we understand we use medicines, we try to stop a particular symptom, stop a particular disease from spreading. And here through various enzymes and through various biochemical reactions, the medicines are actually used to inhibit the disease from spreading. So this is where we have to understand the medicines are very, very important for our human body. And here for any medicine, this has to be produced, this has to be tested, this has to be distributed to the people. That is actually, they are actually having a supply chain. Now the very first thing starts with the discovery phase, which is actually looking for a particular pharmaceutical company. When it starts the discovery phase, it looks into druggable targets, particular portions of our gene or protein which is actually containing the disease. So that disease portions of the particular gene and protein, they will be targeted, and hence this kind of best fitting drugs will be computed, say found out using advanced computer systems. And these particular systems will be actually developing the drug which will be going into the preclinical phase, where maybe some of the human cells they will be taking out and tested in the laboratory, or maybe some animals will be tested on the basis of the new drugs, particularly mice and rats. After this preclinical phases, the clinical phases will be conducted, where the various human beings are also tested on the same. And finally the regulatory approval and the marketing of the drug is actually conducted. And here we can understand AI can actually help us further in the drug target interaction, particularly when we talk about this particular discovery phase, because artificial intelligence, they can actually even create new proteins and new structures in a computer to actually better understand a disease, better understand how drugs can be better equipped to target any disease. And for this it manages various computational applications, and it AI, the particular application of artificial intelligence, it actually helps the scientists to go through many permutation and combination which is actually not possible via say laboratory experiments and so on. And also AI can also increase the accuracy of prediction of a particular drug and the druggable targets, particularly when we are talking about these kind of targets. which are actually maybe binding to our genes or proteins. And here, actually when we talk about the recent tools in AI drug development, we have two tools. Firstly, remember these terms can be very, very important for your prelims examination. First we have AlphaFold, the latest technology is AlphaFold 3 by Google. Then we have Rose TTF Fold, the latest is Rose TTF Fold All Atom by the University of Washington. So as we can see, these AI systems can create complex proteins, right? It can transform amino acids into various other complex arrangements of, say, helices of protein structures. It can create very complex structures which is not possible to create in physical laboratories. These actually are the various fragments of DNA, protein, RNA, right, which can be created on computer models, and finally they can be replicated as drugs that can save millions and billions of people. And here, but we have to understand that there are particular drawbacks. AI models, all models are not always accurate, or particularly drug AI models are 80% accurate, particularly for fragmenting or creating RNA drugs, right? They are not much optimistic on the development of the same. Next, it only helps in the development, or say the discovery phases. In the preclinical and the clinical and the marketing, regulatory approval, AI cannot help in this particular stages. And finally, AI model have many kind of mistakes which are actually known as hallucinations in the language of the artificial intelligence. That means based on the various data inaccuracies and the bad quality of data, AI can make many mistakes that can actually lead to potential dangers to human life via medicines too. And here, when we talk about India and the AI drug development progress in India, India is actually not far behind from the Western nations, because India, through various institutions and institutions such as AIIMS and various other health research institutions, India is trying to accelerate the same. But India, on the other hand, is actually lacking the infrastructural technological infrastructure. So that is why we have to understand India must be spending more on the same. Finally, India must be also spending a lot of skilling on the existing, say, scientists, researchers on the imperatives of the artificial intelligence and the biotechnological applications of artificial intelligence. In the next one, we'll be looking into the recent directives of the Supreme Court on right to property. A very, very important topic for UPSC prelims with reference to Indian polity and governance, and also for the Indian Constitution, features, amendments, and the various aspects of the basic feature of the two. Now here, when we look at the background of the right to property, firstly, initially when the Constitution was adopted, Article 19(1)(f) and Article 31 actually explicitly gave fundamental right status to the right to property. But because we had various issues in the agricultural field where there were big zamindars and there were people with big areas of land that were needed to be distributed to the rest of the agrarian class, so that is why the government brought in First Amendment in 1951 to break some regional restrictions to this fundamental right. And in 44 amendment altogether, Article 19 and Article 19(1)(f) and also Article 31 were actually nullified. That means they were taken out of the fundamental rights, and in their place Article 300A was actually put in as a legal and a constitutional right, but no more a fundamental right. Apart from this, we have a various amount of landmark cases, such as the A.K. Gopalan case of 1950, where actually the Supreme Court held the rights or reasonable restrictions in the same. In the Keshav Nanda Bharati case, which is actually not directly related to, say, this particular right to property, but again we have to understand this was actually one of the main instances where the government took concrete steps to actually grant right to property as a legal status. And also in the same case, we have seen the evolution of the basic structure. Now, in the Minerva Mills case, it was stated by the Supreme Court that right to property maybe is no longer a fundamental right, but it is obviously a constitutional right, because Article 300A is there in the Constitution. And also you have to understand that in the Nanbhai case of 1995, in the same, the Supreme Court clarified that right to property is not a part of the basic structure that was enshrined in the Keshavananda Bharati case. So right to property is not a basic structure, but it is a constitutional right. And here, when we look at the recent case here, the case is actually Kolkata Municipal Corporation versus Bimal Kumar case 2024. It is talking that right to property is projected as a constitutional right and also as interpreted to be a human right because human beings need shelter, right, which is a basic human dignity. That is why right to property is a constitutional right and also a human right for the same. Now, actually, it was fine. This case was actually a result of an appeal by the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, which actually compulsorily tried to acquire a private land without giving any compensation for that acquisition of the land. And actually, we have to understand the Supreme Court referred to this case and said that the government is actually having the power of eminent domain, or power of eminent domain. That means if a property can be actually confiscated or say actually can be taken by the government for any public use, but for the same, the power of eminent domain is actually also telling that for the same, the owner of the land or owner of the private land, they must be also getting some minimum compensation. So that is actually the thing. So this also was highlighted, and that is why the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, they were actually ruled to pay compensation to the private landholder. And here, in Article 300, actually, there is a provision of having the authority of law. The Supreme Court also told that even if particular state governments or even the central government have not appointed any authority of law, even then the Article 300A will be standing because it is a constitutional and human right. And for the same, the Supreme Court also gave 7 principles under the law of the land or right to property, right? So these 7 principles have been developed, but don't worry, you do not have to remember the 7 principles in your mains answers in the prelims questions. So you can just quote these kind of 7 principles, right? Now, for you all, I have this UPSC PYQ 2021 on the position of the right to property in India, and I want all of your answers in the comment section below. And finally, we'll be discussing 4 important prelim snippets. We'll be starting with Lok Adalat because recently the Supreme Court organized a special Lok Adalat, and Lok Adalat is also popularly known as People's Court because it is a kind of an alternate dispute resolution process where people can go to the various Lok Adalats for the redressal of their disputes, and those kind of disputes can be pending at the Supreme or say the High Courts, and they can be even before going to any judicial cases. And this is actually administered by the National Legal Services Authority of the India, and also with reference to various state Lok Adalats, these are actually arranged by the legal services institutions of the state authorities too. And this is actually statutory happening that occurs in India over a frequent period of time under the Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987. Now, when we look into the Lok Adalat cases, any kind of appeal is not available because the award of the decision of the Lok Adalat is final and binding. And if a person has to go for any kind of appeal, now that person has to approach the judiciary in a kind of a fresh case altogether. With reference to fees, there will be no fees which will be payable at any Lok Adalats. So any kind of peoples, they can go with reference to any of the disputes. But there are actually 2 kind of disputes which cannot be argued at the Lok Adalat. Firstly, matters related to divorce, and also matters which are non-compoundable criminal serious kind of offences, right? And also, we have to understand these are the main provisions of this Lok Adalat. And also with reference to this, we have another PYQ question from 2010, that is with reference to Lok Adalats, which of the following statement is correct? Again, let me know of this answer in the comment section below. In the next one, we'll be looking into the Supreme Court Bar Association because recently Kapil Sibal, the senior advocate, has been appointed the president of the Supreme Court Bar Association. It was established in 1951. The membership is actually the same norms of membership that is required at the Bar Council of India. That means the person who is actually wanting or seeking to be member of the Supreme Court Bar Association, they must be actually having a LLB degree, and also they have to be registered under the same. Next, the structure and administration. With reference to the governing body, they will be having one executive committee, a vice president and a president, secretary, treasurer and other elected members. Now, the elections of the same, actually the committee and the bar association and the various other members and the governing body, they will be having some elections to the executive committee, and actually they are done by the members of the bar association, members of the Supreme Court. Finally, there will be other various subcommittees to look into the day-to-day operations of the same. And according to latest news, we also find that 1/3 of the seats are actually reserved for women at the Supreme Court Bar Association. In the next one, we have to look into the recent ongoing events of the trade issues between China and the US, because recently US has actually hiked the amount of tariffs from the Chinese imports. Now, because this is actually from the threat of dumping. To understand dumping, assume this very simple case. Now, say for example, this is the US, which is country A. US manufactures these toys, right, at $75, and it sells the same to the customers for $75. But maybe China, this country has overproduced toys just to import or just to export these toys to other nations. For example, China has overproduced toys, and that is why the supply of the toys is too much. Maybe that is why China is also can afford of say selling the toys to USA for only $50. So obviously the USA people, they will be obviously buying more and more Chinese toys at lower prices. Now this will be leading to losses for US toy makers. So that is why an additional gap of the two prices between these two nations, that is 75 minus 50, that is 25, to actually bring the price of Chinese toys to the price of American toys. This is actually the excess amount of tax or tariff that will be levied by the US government, right, on Chinese say kind of toys. So this is actually to prevent a phenomenon known as dumping, because China has simply produced too much toys and they are actually dumping these toys at cheaper rates in USA, leading to the loss of domestic toy manufacturers in USA. So this is actually the main phenomenon of dumping, and whenever the government will be imposing any tax, that is something which we know as anti-dumping duty. And here China is having overcapacity in many sectors, particularly when we talk about electric vehicle sales, because Chinese companies are actually manufacturing electric vehicles because they dominate over the electric vehicle supply chain of battery production, distribution and everything. That is why the prices of EVs are very cheap, and these cheap price EV are going into various markets of European Union, US and even in India as of now. So we have to understand the domestic manufacturers in these two nations, in these various nations, they are actually losing from the cheap EV cars from China. So that is why USA has started this trade war with China to levy this kind of excess duties. Finally, we will be looking into seek out, which is a recent term in the news, because UPSC have asked many terms in the news in a prelims examination. Now, seek out is actually, when we use the term in aviation, it's a kind of a protest where the aviation workers do not go to work and they abandon office. Right here, employees take coordinated sick leaves such as for example, the company or say airline company may not even operate. Now, this has been seen recently in case of Vistara and Indian Airlines, because it has been alleged that the employees and the staff in these airlines have not been paid on time. That is why they are actually taking mass leaves. This is actually known as seek out, using sick leaves. It can also take place in industrial areas also, when employees take mass sick leaves to actually disrupt operations without a formal strike. They do not announce any formal strike, they suddenly go to mass leaves, mass sick leaves. And this is actually a global trend recently, because formal strikes are not seen nowadays, right? That is why we understood that these employees, they intentionally take some sick leaves to totally cripple their organization. And mainly, if we talk about airlines, if key operational roles such as pilots, such as the various air hosts and hostesses, they take leaves, then the planes will not operate. So this is actually one form of protest over say the late payment of fees, salaries and the various charges of the employees by the companies. So this is a kind of a protest in the same. And finally, we come at the very end. I thank you all for being a very patient audience. Please do attempt the quiz which is following up. All the best for your preparation. Until we meet again, thank you and all the best.